Hi everyone, I'm Fabiano Pecorelli, a PhD candidate from the University of Salerno. My today's talk describes the results obtained from a recent empirical study I have conducted in collaboration with Fabio Palomba and Andrea De Lucia. Let's start giving some context. Software testing is the activity that allows developers to check that the source code works as expected. In the past, a number of researchers have investigated the properties that make test code more effective, as well as their relation to the ability of catching defects in production code. These studies have successfully demonstrated that the quality of test suites has a strong correlation with the post-release defects that appear in the production classes they test. The higher the test quality, the lower the likelihood that the corresponding production code will be affected by defects. For instance, Chen et al. Have demonstrated that a higher line coverage relates to a lower number of defects in production code. Later on, it has been proved that a higher assertion density relates to a lower number of defects in production code. Finally, more recently, Spadini et al. Have found a relation between test smells and defects in production code. Key results of their study showed that smelly test suites make the production code more fault-prone. All these studies found a certain relation between test-related factors and post-release defects. However, we identified a key common limitation. All of them analyzed the impact of various test-related factors in isolation, controlling neither for other test-related factors nor for additional known phenomena affecting the quality of production code. This is the main motivation that moved our research. Can we confirm the reported results when other factors are taken into account as well? To answer this question, we first conducted a multivocal literature review in an effort of eliciting a comprehensive set of metrics that have been associated to post-release defects in the past. Then, we built statistical models to study how the factors identified relate to the number of post-release defects in production code. Our study investigates the impacts of test-related factors on post-release defects across three main dimensions: presence and executability of test suites, statically computable test code factors, and finally dynamically computable test code factors. All these factors came out from the multivocal literature review we conducted. Our multivocal literature review was driven by the following question: what are the test factors that relate to post-release defects according to available white and gray literature? To answer this question, we defined a specific search query. We initially considered the three main keywords, namely test, post-release, and defect. However, we noticed that the term post-release could also be referred to in different ways. So we also include post-production, post-delivery, and post-verification as synonyms. Similarly, to indicate defects, we also checked for synonyms like bug, failure, and fault. Once we have defined the search query, we used it to extract articles from 5 sources, namely ACM Digital Library, IEEE Explore, Science Direct, Springer Link, and Scopus. As a result, we obtained 8,671 articles. Starting from this first set of articles, we applied some exclusion criteria in order to avoid the selection of the unrelated ones. In particular, we excluded articles out of scope, articles that were not reporting an empirical validation, articles that were not written in English, articles whose full text was not available, articles that did not undergo a peer review process, for instance master thesis, duplicated articles retrieved by multiple sources, and finally articles that have later been extended. For instance, in cases of a conference paper that has been extended to a journal, we only considered the journal article because it is more complete. This filtering phase reduced the number of articles to 72. Then, after conducting a snowballing and a manual search, we obtained a total number of 88 white papers. As for the grey literature, we queried Google, obtaining 210 papers. After applying the exclusion criteria, this number was reduced to 26. Finally, as a last step, we applied one inclusion criterion to select only the papers that best suited our goal. In particular, we selected articles reporting an empirical validation of the relations between test-related factors and post-release defects. The final set contained 37 articles. Those articles refer to several aspects of tests. Most of them just focus on presence and the executability of tests. A smaller set consider factors that statically describe test suites. In particular, we extracted 4 metrics: test lines of code describing the test sites, test weighted method count describing test complexity, test efferent coupling describing the test coupling, and the assertion density measured as the size of a test divided by the number of assert statements it contains. Some of the articles retrieved focus on test smells. In our study, we considered 5 test smells types, namely assertion roulette, eager test, indirect testing, resource optimism, and mystery guest. Finally, a great number of articles retrieved focus on dynamic factors expressed in terms of line, range, and mutation coverage. Once defined the set of variables to retrieve, we designed an empirical study aiming at finding possible relations between tests and post-release defects. We defined 3 research questions with respect to the 3 aspects we were interested in. In our first research question, we tried to understand whether the presence and the executability of test classes related to post-release defects of production code. As a second research question, we wondered about the existence of a relation between statically computable test code factors and post-release defects of production code. Finally, in our third research question, we looked for the existence of a relation between dynamically computable test code factors and post-release defects. Regardless of the research question under analysis, we relied on the following experimental setup. First, we extracted all the independent variables from 8 APACHE systems. Then, to avoid possible biased interpretation and to overcome the limitation we identified in previous studies, we also calculated a set of confounding factors. We relied on metrics that have been associated with defect proneness in the past. In particular, we considered static metrics describing size, complexity, and coupling of production code, code smells, and 2 process metrics that are the number of pre-release changes and pre-release defects. As a dependent variable, we counted the number of post-release defects. To compute it, we first retrieved the list of defect-inducing commits, relying on the SZZ algorithm, and then we counted the number of defect-inducing activities involving the class in the period after the selected release. Before relating our independent and confounding variables to the dependent one, we performed a multicollinearity analysis. To the same, we compute the Spearman's rank correlation coefficient, and when 2 variables had a collinearity higher than 0.6, we excluded the more complex one from the model. As the last step, we built a generalized linear model to find statistically significant relations between our independent variables and the dependent one. The next slides report the results achieved. As for the first research question, we found that the presence and the executability of tests have a relation to post-release defects only when they are considered in isolation. When also confounding factors are considered, the only significant variables are the number of pre-release changes and defects. Similar results have been achieved while answering our second research question. Test size relates to post-release defects only if no additional production and process metrics are considered. Besides pre-release changes and pre-release defects, we also found that in this case, mystery guest is a statistically significant factor. Mystery guest is a test smell that arises when a test relies on external resources. This could cause the tests affected by the smell to have a non-deterministic behavior, passing or failing with respect to the existence and the state of the requested resource. Intuitively, test classes that intermittently pass or fail cannot properly exercise the corresponding production code, and so they cannot find defects. The analysis conducted in the context of our third research question confirmed our previous results. Test-related factors are more powerful when considered in isolation. When considering both static and dynamic test code indicators, we observed production and test code size to be statistically significant in explaining post-release defects. The results we just described raised some insights that deserve additional discussion. As explained before, a number of researchers have investigated the role of test-related factors on post-release defects in the past, finding them as highly relevant. While our results do not tell the opposite, we found that most of the considered factors have a lower explanatory power than the one previously reported. The key to explain the differences between our outcomes and the ones previously reported is in the presence of confounding factors that possibly balanced the effects of test-related factors. This is particularly true in the case of lines of code of production class and pre-release changes, that are the most relevant metrics to explain the future defect proneness of source code. One of the most evident findings of our study is the very high influence of pre-release changes on post-release defects. This relation indicates that the change frequency of classes impacts the future defect proneness of production code more than other aspects. In this respect, it may be possible that high-quality pre-release changes prevent the emergence of post-release defects. As such, we can claim that keeping the change process under control would be worthwhile, and that the definition of mechanisms supporting developers when dealing with software evolution represents a key challenge for the research community. Last but not least, our findings report that other test-related factors, such as test size and test smells, are more related to post-release defects than metrics generally considered relevant. This is the case of code or mutation coverage. This seems to suggest that the design of test suites matter and may possibly pave the way for novel automatic test case generation techniques that do not consider anymore only code and mutation coverage as main metrics to optimize, but also some other factor related to test suites design. This concludes my today's presentation. Thank you for watching.